Hey guys, how's it going? It's Chris here, author of the Vengeance series over at vengeancebooks.com. Today's video, we're going to be looking at a document called The Story of Ken, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is Ken Davis's backstory, at least as it's like original written out inception. So this isn't canon, and I will say spoilers because not like this is his story. That's actually pretty close to what his story ends up being, and a lot of this is like loose canon in my head, but not all of this was ever fully written out. But I'll explain as we get there. But originally, what this was going to be was part of, I think, the Cursed Ones story, which had Christine or Chrism's backstory and Ken and Magcrow, all their stories kind of in one little short story anthology thing, which was originally where Devil to the Damned started out as, was the Cursed Ones, and then I segregated the two, Ken's story, Chrism's story, and made Chrism's story into Devil to the Damned. And Ken's story hasn't been told fully. His story is told in pieces between like book one, book two, Devil to the Damned, and yeah. So you get Ken's backstory through that because honestly, it's nothing too insane and we get all the important details. So I could go through and unveil all the stuff that happens, but like we get all the most important stuff. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll go back, I'll take a look at this. But anyway, this is as I wrote it when I was trying to figure it out, the story of Ken. So again, this is loose non-canon, and I'll mention kind of the stuff that I think is still canon in my head as we go along. So here we go. Timeline stuff also ignored because I don't know exactly when the timeline actually is. So, 6 years after Akram fell from Nexus and took on the moniker Sin, a child was born. Discovered abandoned in his car seat at the edge of a rushing river, the 5-month-old boy was recovered and taken in by by a residual caretaker named Adriana Kimball. 37 years old, endlessly compassionate, and harboring a strong, nurturing character, the perfect surrogate mother to ensure this abandoned child would know its value and never dismay over birth parents' choices. So this, with the whole Adriana thing, that is canon as it has been described in the books, because we do kind of get that. The house mother brought the child to her home at a dilapidated orphanage by the edge of a small town they lived in. The orphanage itself consisted of two major influences coming together as a single operation: orphanage and church. Residing deep in a forest at the edge of an unassuming little town, the construct operated on aggressive Catholic beliefs and housed nearly 24 children and adolescents, and an equal number of saints and educators, which, again, that to me is canon. That's just. The Catholic Church reinforced the religion in all who inhabited it to an oppressive degree, which bred a natural hostility in the children of those that did not align with the adults who questioned harsh. Of did not align, and the adults did not, yeah, sure, whatever, man, making the petulant and restrictive environment that much more insufferable. Adriana duteously raised a boy, giving him the first name Kenneth and the surname of her mother, Davis. He grew up to be a quiet child, an inquisitive problem solver with an aptitude for his studies, though he lacked any social skills and struggled to fit in amongst his peers. The other children thought he was strange and how he thought it was strange how he sat alone, talked to himself, and chose to wander the surrounding forest when able to slip past the spotlight eyes of the sisters. Unconfirmed to the stigma Maybe that's supposed to be unconformed to the stigma which resounded within the walls, Ken felt comfort in solitude, often ignoring invitations to play, sarcastic or otherwise. Hardly speaking and never expressing sadness, joy, or inspiration. He was an enigma cherished by his adoptive mother and delegated as a freak by his peers. Girls wouldn't talk to him, even the youngest who shouldn't have any predisposition or of segregation kept their distance. So yeah, Ken was just like quiet. He literally barely spoke more than a word a day, kind of thing, except for to outside of Adriana. Adriana, I'm going to say them both back and forth because whatever. And he just read whatever books he could find and went off by himself. So he was just very quiet. He just wasn't much of a social person. Fellow boys took a more energetic approach, degrading him with false allegations to his abandonment, though nobody knew the truth of his origin and had no pedestal to stand on. Their words still hurt. He never expressed the pain and confusion he felt, choosing to carry on in silence, speaking only to Adriana, and even then, hardly muttering a thank you for her kindness. That's one thing is I never fully, even in my own head, I just let it be a total mystery of who his parents are and why they abandoned him. I don't have a background for that, and I'm not even gonna like make up something on the spot because I don't have that. It's just a complete mystery to me, even. Punishment was commonplace here. Strict rules were set in stone, and backtalk was never tolerated, leading to a lot of stick beatings and isolation. These punishments were not exclusive to Ken. Every child that resided in this building was subject to harsh lashings, which is also why he tried to stay quiet, even though his silence sometimes was seen as disrespectful, so he would then get the whippings for that. Mental illnesses were a prevalent issue in the young ones. The trauma that came with growing up in a place like this, years of feeling unloved and punished for merely expressing themselves, instilled nasty habits in the desensitized children. True, they suffered together, but most did not establish lasting ties. This was simple survival. As Ken grew into his budding teenage years, he continued in his pursuit for knowledge, believing a strong and educated mind would allow him to hit the ground running once he got out of here. The thing is, he didn't plan on waiting until he was of age. He planned to arm himself with every book in this building and any that Adriana, I don't know if it's Adrienne or Adriana. What am I think I've confused myself. Brought back to him from her outings. Once he felt confident enough, he would run away, lead this life in search of somewhere that he could fulfill himself. At age 14, Adrienne, did I write Adriana? I did. I wrote Adriana here, so I'm just going to read it as it is. At age 14, Adrienne suddenly passed away from asthmatic complications brought on by the discovery of asbestos in her room and mildew throughout the building. A loss that carved a hole in his chest and left Ken with a lingering sadness he could not fully express. The blister of her death perpetuated in his system in the coming months, demotivating his body but strengthening the resolve in his mind. Nothing was holding him here, but there was no one he cared about enough to go on. She wasn't only the mother he had come to love, but a protector from the relentless teasing he faced. With his grief came a change in his behavior, reclusive to a non existent degree. He would often be found standing before the fireplace in the common room, staring up at the mounted mirror above the mantel and reading the Bible to his own reflection. When approached by the adults, he would return their concern or belittlement with a smile. No words, just a smile, as if pretending to listen while silently plotting something devious. No such act was ever executed, and for the period of time following her death, his behavior fluctuated. He couldn't find the drive to leave anymore. Never moving on from her death, he blamed himself for things he couldn't control, refusing to change, but always challenging himself with puzzles, mind games, and delving into the psychology of his peers. He found he was able to manipulate some of the teachers with a few selected words. Whether through fear or pity, he established a sort of legacy among the kids who grew too old and moved on and those that were new. While many of the children moved on from the bullying, one kid in particular never set aside that prejudice. A boy whose name Ken didn't even know, but consistently dealt with in all of his time here, had had enough of, a boy whose name Ken didn't even know, but consistently dealt with in all of his time here, had had enough of Ken and his disregard for rules and coddled presence after Adrian's passing. That was a terrible, terrible run on sentence and barely made sense. The thing that bothered him most of all was Ken's lack of response or retaliation to his efforts, only further antagonizing him. So all the stuff you're reading right here is not entirely stated. You know, we get bits and pieces of it throughout the books, like I said, but this is all, in my head, the canon. This is still canon, it's just not published. Fed up with the silence, the unnamed kid, aged 17, got the other three friends to beat the hell out of Ken, doing everything in their power to force a word, a tear, anything. But even with the punches, slaps, and kicks, the bloody nose, swollen eye, and bleeding gums, he didn't break. Inside, he screamed but could not animate his body to fight back. There was no living will, nothing. Furious, the oldest kid grabbed a thick book from the nearby end table and chucked it at Ken's head. The book slipped and launched up above the fireplace, crashing into the glass and creating a spiderweb crack from the bottom left corner. With the impact, a large shard of glass broke free and landed on the fireplace below. The kid slowly approached the shard, fuming. The other kids noticed his motion and called out to him to stop, that this was too far, but he shushed them and retrieved the glass. It was a large piece, broken in the shape of an arrowhead and roughly 4 inches in length. Like a puppet, the young adult approached Ken and grabbed him by the throat, pressing him into the carpet and gripping the glass shard tight. His eyes were glossy, wide, and teeth chattering. Caught up in the moment, he brought the shard to Ken's face. What followed was a threat, instructing him to say, "I'm sorry," or beg to be spared. Which I think this right here was supposed to be a small parallel with Kim and Stacy's whole thing of saying "I'm sorry," even though it's not like any link to it. It was just kind of like a reference to that, I guess. I don't know why I wrote that. Ken lay there, neck in a tight hold, staring up at this twisted kid while the others just stood and watched. A ringing, a ringing in his head defended him briefly. The air he sucked in was too thin, tasteless, and unforgiving. The room started to spin as his heart rate accelerated and the urge to speak grew, but the words refused to surface. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't talk. In a minute's time, the bully gave in to temptation and jammed the serrated tip of glass under Ken's flesh, starting at his supposed to be his starting at his right cheek. I was thinking of never mind. Starting at his right cheek and dragging it down a couple of inches in a vertical line, which actually it's a horizontal line that got adjusted. Yeah, so pulling up the artwork for Ken, it's a little horizontal line, kind of at a slight angle, but yeah. Ken flinched in pain while the broken shards sliced layer by layer, drawing dark red blood to the surface to run down his face and onto the floor. The blade raised, and the immense throbbing took hold. Tears welled in his eyes, but his mute lips only mimed what was required. Shaking in frustration and disbelief of his own actions, the bully furrowed his brows and shouted, "Talk," before starting at the top again, and following the first line, cutting deeper and deeper into his face. Finally, his lungs released a voice with a shrill, aggrieved. I think it's supposed to be maybe aggravated. Is aggrieved a word? Yeah, aggrieved. Oh yeah, aggrieved. Yeah, doy, stupid. Aggrieved eruption. He called out only four words: "I will kill you." His booming voice recalled the glass, and the boy quickly discarded it to the side. A relieved, demented smile split across his face at the sight of Ken huffing and crying. He then crawled off the bloody and beaten 14-year-old, and without a word or final glance, he stuffed his hands in his pockets and walked away. The other three kids lingered for a moment, unsure of what to do, but quickly decided to catch up. His wide gaze latched onto the ceiling as it spun, holding it in place and instead revolving his body like a turntable. In his head, he played her voice over and over. The lullaby she would hum, her laugh, those little pieces of her that he cherished to keep her alive in his heart. The skin which caged his bones also sealed in every last emotion he tried to forget in her passing, nailing those pesky feelings to the wall and letting them dry so that he may never experience inner suffering again. Yet the sting in his face turned out to be the metaphorical key to unlock that very cage. Every repressed emotion spilled out, mixed in with the precious blood that his body so carelessly wasted. Unfortunate as it may be, he was alive, and this proved it. An epiphany struck, and for once his body moved without the declaration of his will. Sitting upright with the posture of a wet newspaper, he watched the string of blood drip to his lap, then muttered, "I'm sorry." He stood up with revitalized motives. Today is the day he would leave forever. So, again, all of that right there, to me, is canon. That's pretty much how it all happened in my head. It's just, maybe I should clean this up and put it out as like a little, just like a little thing. I don't know. I have so many things as you guys have seen on this channel. Yeah, maybe one day I'll clean this up and make it canon, make it into like a 30-40 page thing, and then release it as just like a little tiny side thing, I guess. I don't know, maybe. Anxiety was high and his body pumped full of energy, and his body was pumped full of energy. He bolted out the door and stumbled through the barren halls, passing his shared room without stopping to collect a single item. Pushing by nuns as they casually strolled, he ignored their angry shrieks behind him and burst out, even though he's covered in blood, and burst out the front door, blinded by the idea of a new future. Once outside, he kept that frantic pace and kicked up dirt, stomping across the dead grass and looping around the back of this large Hippocratic establishment. Between the building and the woods was a pale yard and stone wall barrier only as tall as his knees. He leapt over the wall and continued a mad dash through the trees. Low-hanging dead branches slapped his face, assaulting the fresh wound and causing him to slow and shield his head. This odd pace stumbled him as the wet ground attempted to trip him. Suddenly, as he reached a small clearing, Ken's foot sank into the loose dirt and pulled him to the ground. This is after work. It's 11 o'clock. I'm actually a little bit sleepy and my mouth is dry, so I apologize for all the mumbles and stumbles. With the impact, he felt a peculiar shockwave rip through the earth and rumble between his thin frame. Fallen on his face, he panted heavily and attempted to get upright when the ground trembled and gave way. A sinkhole opened up beneath him and brought him down 20 feet onto a concrete floor. A rampant cascade of stone, sticks, and loosely packed dirt crashed along with him to the floor below, burying him partially in the gravel and knocking him unconscious. In hours' time, long after the dust had settled, Ken's eyes fluttered open, unaware of his placement. On his side, buried halfway in the mess, he rolled his head. He rolled his head to the open sky above and peered through the few long branches that stretched over this ditch. Tired, numb, and in complete disbelief, he waited there, embracing the chill of the dirt and trying to focus his blurry vision and comprehend exactly what this was. The blood on his face had dried with the soil's help, but the ache persisted. He pulled himself up, plucking his arms and leg out of the pile like he was uprooting a flower. Everything was quiet aside from the pebbles and insignificant specks that fumbled down the massive anthill. Rotating his head, he was baffled to find he had fallen into a room, a shelter of some sort. The space itself was only about 30 feet in diameter with a cracked foundation and wooden supports holding up the dirt ceiling. There were wooden barrels against the wall, a few chairs, small crates, and a large desk with drawers against the furthest wall. The ground above had collapsed right in the center of this bunker, giving him a proper view of what this place offered. From where he sat, directly ahead and tucked into a dark corner, was a rusted ladder leaning against the wall, assumingly leading up to a hidden door beneath the ground used to access this place in emergencies. He stood from the pile, lightheaded with a bustling hunger in his belly, and began exploring. The colorful splotches that danced around his vision provided a necessary distraction while his fractured mind searched the room. This is something that did get changed. It's not a ladder leading up to a door. It's actually just like the door. Fuck. Um, it's not a roof access. It's just it's a door against the wall that goes up a few steps to another to a latch in the ground. The barrels had easily removable lids, but sadly were all empty. The crates, which were stacked in twos and lined the walls, unfortunately required a pry bar or special tool to get in. Dragging his wobbly legs to the desk, he examined the surface and found a small metal toolbox that contained many candles of different shapes and sizes. Useless to him now, so he set the box on the floor. There were many papers strewn about the surface, as well as a calendar book with the furthest year being 1991. Nothing important was written down and no dates were marked, so he ignored it. There were also pencils, a compass, and boxed matches on top, all of which he just sifted through without paying any attention. His mind was spinning with theories about this bunker's original purpose and if there was anything he should take to get by until he found safety. Arms and hands operating outside of a conscious influence, he pried open the top right drawer of the desk to meet the sight of something that immediately garnered interest: a book. Even in the darkness that shrouded the outer circle of this room, he could identify the black object with absolute clarity. The very moment his eyes fell on the leather cover, a filthy sense of dread ignited the air. His throat closed up, eyes dried out, and a flicking needle in his chest argued for him to walk away. But there was this aroma, a palpable stench that came from no specific direction or source. A putrid yet enticing stink triggered something in his brain, almost as though, by opening this drawer, he released a horde of souls just on the brink of disintegration. He took the book in his right hand, really feeling the weight and texture. The very instant his flesh connected with the binding, a pulse of energy shot out of the book, though he didn't notice, for it existed outside of this realm of perception. His realm of perception. In his hand, the novel was rather unassuming, cracked leather binding and yellowed pages tightly constricted in a black ribbon. What immediately stood out was a symbol carved into the center of the book, but hidden behind the thick ribbon. He set the book in the desk, kicking up a small cloud of accumulated dust, and untied the knot. With the ribbon unclasped, the symbol became clear, an inverted pentacle. Now, even more curious and giddy by this discovery, he flipped open the book to see what was inside. The first page was blank, but the second and third had a lot of handwritten notes randomly scrawled on the page. Illegible at first glance, but slowly some letters began to stick out. All at once, the atmosphere around him changed. Without any warning or indication, his ears depressurized, knocking his equilibrium out of whack. Out of whack, I hate that phrase. Why did I write that? This sudden altercation caused his balance to falter, and he stumbled to the right, catching himself on the corner of the desk. Skull ringing, world shaking, he fought for a breath as the room around him started to close in. Now, before I get into this stuff, again, this interaction with Sin right here, or right down here, is all non-canon. We do see his interaction with Sin, his first. I mean, pretty much everything we just saw right here. It's like there's a break because in Devil to the Damned, we do see Chrism and Sin coming across Ken as he's reading through the book. So that does happen. So pretty much Everything from when he opens the book and where we get all this, um, all the atmosphere changes, to me is canon. This is how he found the book, and this is what he was looking at. Outside maybe like the details of the book, how it looks changed from Devil to the Damned in this, and then it's pretty much like a cutoff, and then the interaction that follows when he opens it up is non-canon because we have the canon version of this interaction in Devil to the Damned. So keep that in mind. So it's like canon, not exactly the same, but it's like yeah, canon back here, and then from here till after this interaction, non-canon. Okay. His lungs slowed down to a whisper, but his heart rate slammed against his ribs, trying to break free from its prison while his eyes scanned the wall in front of him. With great effort, he flipped his body around but fell backward onto the floor. Landing on his tailbone, he now faced the collapsed pile in the middle of the room where a tall silhouetted figure was mounted directly on top of the small hill. When he spun around, the book slipped from his hand and landed on the floor in front of him. He looked to it, but by the time it took for his eyes to disconnect from that figure and settle on the cover, the figure itself had moved and was now stood with his toe pressed against the book's spine. This impossible maneuver struck immense fear into his heart, and he attempted to crawl back but couldn't move at all. The character bent down and retrieved the book. Their frontward appearance cast a deep shadow from the pouring light in behind him. "I have been looking for this," the shadow spoke, his voice booming and soothing equally. With the expulsion of his breath and the acidic sound of his articulate words, the room cleared of any and all vile intent. The declining pressure allowed Ken to inhale clear oxygen into his lungs and regain control over his body, to which he wasted no time in backing away frightened. Moving quickly, he bunked his head in the underside corner of the desk, lowered himself, and pressed his back against the closest wall, offering only a feverish wheeze. The silhouette held the book in one hand and lazily flipped through the first few pages with a pleasant smirk. In the cast shadow of his face, Ken could discern a shine to his eyes, almost like a faint glow in this stark contrast. Sensing his stare, the man shifted his gaze and snapped the book shut. "You're bleeding, boy," he commented. Ken's response was a slow, confirming nod. The sneer on his face grew. "Just what are you doing in a place like this?" He gestured around them. The boy's lips were dry. "Fell," he choked out, voice whistling. Sin hummed. Then he closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, and the piercing yellow irises, which is not how you spell irises, radiated brightly. The supernatural display made every muscle in his fragile body relax, but the angst spiked. The shine simmered to a dim glow, and then the man reduced his grin. "You have a lot of sour emotions buried. I can help you release that pressure." His terrified expression wavered to a perplexed but curious ogle. But still, he bit his tongue. "Would you like to make a deal, child?" he said, and held out his hand. Man, just so straightforward with it. From his palm sprouted a new light, softly emitting a docile purple tone. A crystal rose from his skin and rested flat in his hand. "Those that cause you such grief, such anger, will be subject to whatever fate you would impose." His entire existence became fixated on the stone, eyes opened as wide as they could in order to drink up the icy light. And he stared into the core of the gem. As he stared into the core of the gem, a liberating sensation washed over him. That seed of hatred planted in his belly from all the years of torment fed off of the promising gem, granting him visions of bloody liberation. That single thought perpetuated in his heart, pumping his arms full of sinful blood that raised his arms up, casting away all good intention. Drunk off the idea, he reached to take it, but the stone was pulled away. "In exchange," he added, "the payment is your soul in time." The old man's words only penetrated the first layer of comprehension, hearing but not understanding. He definitely heard what was said, but gave no additional consideration. He snatched the stone from his hand and watched it sink into his own flesh like a marble in water. He waited for something to happen, glancing at his hand, then to the old man, and then to the book. I guess we're just going to say his name is Sin. Right here. Sin then lobbed the book into the air, and right before the kid's eyes, it disappeared in a flash of white light. "Thank you for locating this relic," which, no, it would not be a relic, it would be an artifact. I didn't figure that out till later. "My research thanks you," he stated calmly before turning away. Ken leapt forward, but collapsed to his knees. A massive surge of potent energy ripped through his veins, wreaking havoc on his system and causing him to vomit. All of the thoughts that he had laser-focused on her face. Her loving smile and complimentary words, encouraging him to smite the evil that plagued his life. He nodded along as his skin became milky gray and the endless black painted his eyes. The room was dark. listening to his own amplified breathing and the crickets that chirped just outside. He stood, not alone but totally isolated, as if waking from a long, intense dream. His body was slow to react, and his mind was unable to record anything immediately after waking, nor could it exactly recall what had occupied it for the unknown time, nor could it exactly recall what had occupied it for the unknown time. Slowly, he started to recognize where he stood, and as the surrounding puzzle pieces fell into place, so too did the recent memories associate. At his feet was a body, jaw torn off and thrown somewhere into the dark, the rest of his fingers mangled and his lower half twisted halfway around. Beyond the pool of now dried blood was another and another. 6 corpses total littered at his feet, all with creative and unique ways in which they met their demise. He was surprisingly calm at the sight, still not entirely lucid or convinced this was real. With each body that occupied his vision, he was silently assaulted by freeze frames of their deaths. Watching through the eyes of the killer, he attacked in a blind rage, inconsolable and brutal to the very depths of definition. The murders didn't start here, but they all ended where they now lay. As though listening to someone recount the experience and picturing it alongside their words, he watched the choppy, blurred reenactment of this killer chase down every single person that lived here. The nuns, the teachers, the children, not a single soul was spared. He felt sick, but that's a mistake. He felt sick but couldn't look away. Now the feeling of skin on his bones started to return, and his brain sent, man, a lot of mistakes here, sent the appropriate signals to move. Retreating a step, his heel touched the arm of a dead woman. Turning, he could see in the dark that her head was missing, located in the dead fireplace just behind him. The fireplace. Rotating 180 degrees, his eyes traced every inch of the mantel, stone, and the mirror above. That broken mirror returned a unique visage as his eyes connected. A memory filtered red of the killer catching a similar glance. Okay. Except something was entirely wrong. The killer whose eyes he had fallen victim to was himself. Lost in the current reflection, he saw a clear overlap of almost 12 hours ago. The bodies were in the exact same place, as was he. Contrarily, in this illusion it was daytime. His skin was gray, horrendous amounts of blood soaked him through, and both his eyes and hair were a light purple color. It was sickeningly bizarre, but intriguingly macabre. I remember the first time I learned that macabre was pronounced like that, not macabre or macabre. Man, that blew my mind. Breaking contact with the glass, his sheepish gaze, God, I can't say that, fell to his own body, where he matched the blood to the reflection. Sticky, wafting of death, he held his breath. The hair on his body stood on end as reality came crashing down around him. Psychologically ripped to shreds, reduced to the mental state of his fractured childhood self, he floated in a pile of bones and screaming voices, bathing in the suffering of a mass grave, casting sinful woe in his continued existence despite his effort to drown. Slowly, he recovered the pieces which he recognized as himself, and rebuilt the world around him as he could remember it. It was there that he heard something unexpected. Kenneth, a distant, reverberant male voice, spoke. The word pitched his ears, bubbling up from the back of his skull and twanging like an empty tin can. He covered his ears in response, but quickly understood the word came from inside his own head. "Hello?" he responded. "You're awake." He sounded relieved. "Are you all right?" He shook his head. "What's going on?" "That's a lot to unpack. Let's start with a name. I'm Magcrow." Huh? Where are you?" His tender words shivered across his tongue, switching eyes left to right. He turned away from the mirror, only to fall back on the sight of the bodies. "Did I do this?" "We did, and I'm inside your head," he explained, trying to relay a soothing tone. "Stay calm?" he suggested. I can try." His stomach turned. "Do I have to stay here?" "No. Go out into the hall, if it'll make you feel better," Macro replied. A nod. "Yeah." He carefully maneuvered around the bodies, stepping over the rigid corpses but unable to avoid the puddles of adhesive blood. Inevitably, he arrived at the door and stepped out. The click of it shutting behind him raced through the dark, vacant hallways, increasing paranoia. Once outside, he moved to the opposite wall and pressed his back against the stripped paint, sliding down to a sitting position and holding his head, nursing the swell in his brain. "I don't remember. Like I should, Ken explained with a strenuous drawl. That's because I was the one controlling your body. His eyes went wide. You killed them? Magro seemed uneasy. It's a bit confusing. You took a deal for my father, Sin. He spoke slow, comforting. In doing so, you promised him your soul, and in exchange, he gave you me, a tuffle. A heavy breeze entered an open window somewhere in the building, slithering room to room, its path uninterrupted. As he turned to identify this wind, a dark illusion painted over his vision. That hallway to his left was packed tight with a negative scan image of silhouetted figures, two-dimensional but somehow stretching for him. Looking away, the moisture in his nose dripped down his lip. Why won't they leave me alone? You'll get used to it. Guilt is an authoritative sentiment, even if the cause of action is justified. They will still haunt you. It's the curse all hosts have to face. Sniffling, what do we do now? Macro chuckled softly. What? Ken asked, keeping his eyes on the floor, trying to search for him in his skull. It's just funny. When I jumped your skin, he blew air through his lips, fucking crazy. As intended, but now, after all that bloodshed, I feel awful. The very basic details of what this was started to make sense to him, at least how he perceived it with limited facts so far. This was a mistake. We killed them. I didn't want, I did, but I'm with you, he assured. Trust me, I was designed for this, but it doesn't feel right. Voice hoarse, he coughed. Explain everything to me, from the beginning. Macro sighed. The short story is you made a deal, as I said. I'm the gift for your soul, and together we're supposed to kill people, grow stronger by doing so, and then hunt down my brothers and sisters, other kids like you. You'd be dead by then, and your body would be mine, but by that point, if I survive, I get a chance of fighting Chrism to become a deity. That's the long and short of it. He spoke fast, but gave him enough time to absorb everything. How do you know all this? Where do you come from? There are so many layers to peel back to every question. His jaw tightened a little. My siblings and I are born with shared knowledge of our purpose, minimalistic intelligence in most ways, but well-versed in combat and our lust for power. Most of who we are and what we learn is subsequently derived from our host. Sin has built something fierce in his time here. I'm afraid I don't know any more than anyone else. Ken observed the mildew at the base of the wall, picking up on the foul smell that he had somehow ignored since coming to. Do we have to keep killing? He asked fearfully. Dejection in his throat. We're supposed to. Ken remained quiet, busy picking at a tooth that somehow got looped under his shoelaces. I don't want to, and it doesn't sound like you do either, he said sheepishly. Macro held his breath for a moment, digging deep into Ken's emotional core. Your hate is gone, he stated naturally. I think you had an impact on me, Ken. You weren't meant for this. What are you saying? A depleted sigh. I'm saying the drive to kill is branded on my soul, yet, after what happened in the room over there, I simply don't want to, and that's unnatural. Nausea continued to churn in his gut like a sponge soaked in algae water, causing him to salivate and spit to the floor consistently. All the while they talked, Ken couldn't completely invest himself in his words, a disconnect Macro picked up on easily. You got something else on your mind? He didn't pose it as a question. Mm-hmm. That book. Book? Ken looked up to the door in front of him. When he found me, it was right after I fell into this underground shelter. In that shelter, I found this really old sealed book, but he took it from me. Any idea what it was? Macro asked patiently. He said it was a relic, artifact, and that he was thankful to have it back. I was able to read some of it, and what I read, he explained in a drained but hopeful tone. A raspy howl of wind blew in from the cast shadows, carrying with it a muddled collection of pleas and desperate sobbing. Ken winced at the sound, averting his eyes down the opposite end. Magro was interested. What was on the pages? His chest ran cold, recalling the text. It was talking about a formula, a spell, some weird magic used in merging souls. Alright, last chapter here. Hopefully you guys are holding on tight. Over the passing year, so I don't remember exactly what we have here when it comes to canonicity. I assume most of this stuff is still loose canon, but anyway, over the passing year. Having escaped the bleak confines of the orphanage, Ken and Macro headed for the forest in an attempt to start over. Actually, I believe I remember this. Most of this I considered to be canon for how they first started interacting. An attempt to start over, an attempt to assume their identity and start anew, leaving behind the fractured history that molded the young teen into something more than he ever thought possible. A shard-inflicted wound healed over from the demonic transformation, but the scar forever remained on his cheek as a reminder of where he came from. Which is kind of like a lot of the Tuffle hosts will have instigating wounds or notable features that will remain on as part of the cosmetic design of the Tuffle, or and can remain after the fact. So, like with Kim, the stitches on her lips that remained as just part of Alice. And I get, for me, it's literally just like a way for me to design different characters, and it doesn't make any consistent sense, but it's just kind of how it works. Because in the way that works with Alice and Kim, it's like Kim associates Alice with the stitches, and with like that moment too, that it's like a bridge between them, and it's not, the stitches aren't her, but the stitches were meant for the whatever. Tansu has the freckles on her face, which is a very small detail, but that's just because that's something that she particularly really likes about herself. So something about Alice and the magic of their souls joining and merging and whatever have you, picked up on that sentiment and did something with it. And same thing with Ken. The scar healed, but the wound healed, but the scar remained because of their time. How that was like, yeah. So it's whatever. For months, they survived to the edge of the forest, sneaking into the nearby town to rummage and steal to survive. Dishonest, but necessary at a time like this. In those first few months, the two learned a lot about one another, finding a shared interest in many things, but none so prominent as the sunrise. Taking advantage of this newfound balance, agility, and endurance, Ken scampered up tall trees until he found a suitable branch with a wide view of the overlooking mountains. At least once a week, they would wait in the brisk air for the sun to grace the world with the orange and purple shine of a new day. In moments like these, Ken would confide in his new inner demon, sharing stories of, I did it right there, Adriana, maybe it was autocorrecting to Adriana and all the things she taught him, expressing regret in his lack of verbal expression in those days. Expression, hate when I do that. Macro sympathized and fed those delicate memories with positive reinforcement, the antithesis to what he intended. The antithesis to what he was intended to do. That alliance with his human stirred a pot of angst in his chest, but he fought hard to listen to his brain and not stoke the fire. One thing was clearly defined between the two, a shared ideology that killing was not what they wanted. Instead, they spoke about the book Ken had found and how it relates to Macro's own anima. Thus, a history of all he knew about the Tuffle and sin was willfully shared with the child, fueling his thirst for knowledge. A new goal was born from these chats, a desire to seek out all they could that related to sin and the mysteries of this world. 6 months in, the two slept by the fire of their campsite when they were attacked by some unknown force. Thrown back into a tree, Ken was unable to defend himself at first and instead chose to scurry away. The assailant is hidden in the shadows, but spewing groans and expletives. At last, after sustaining heavy damage and getting pinned against a large boulder, Macro was able to take control and fight back. Amateur at best, but inherently powerful enough to fend off their foe, delivering the killing blow with hesitant aggression. The two nearly collapsed, but pulled together their remaining strength to assess the dead. It was human, mostly. However, this creature had drastic modifications that aligned it with something not of nature. Overgrown teeth slicing through the upper lips, pointed ears, stringy hair, and entirely red skin. A fiend. A dilapidated soul without the mental fortitude to discern right from wrong. Injured, exhausted, and malnourished, the two rested by the corpse and cleaned off the goopy blood. The body of this monster started to melt away, and they returned to the safety of their campsite. So that was, I didn't remember that. So yeah, their first encounter outside of that was actually a fiend from Underworld that had picked up their scent and their energy, except it wouldn't be a fiend because fiends are actually more civilian types, I've come to discern now. This would probably be more than likely either a feral or a drogue. So, yeah, and I think in my head that would still be canon. They fought off a drogue or a feral. It might be a feral, actually. And that's kind of how they also got more into like, well, what the fuck is this thing? We got to learn more about this. So something that was fueling their interest in learning stuff even more. Soon after Ken and Macro fought off the fiend, they fled from the woods in search of somewhere safer. In 7 days, they had traveled over 300 miles, stopping only when they needed to scavenge or sleep. I don't know how realistic that is, actually, I'm going to say right now. Finally, they settled in a fairly run. I guess they weren't walking the whole way. They probably jumped on buses, they hitchhiked, they did whatever they could to travel that in 7 days. So, yeah. They settled in a fairly run down town with a relatively small population and many shut down businesses, making it easy enough for them to transition between shelters when needed. In this town, they spent a lot of time at the local library, where Ken borrowed and even stole a few books to pass the time and research anything he could about demons, fiends, and the history relating to such, which in this world would just be fictional stories, but in all fiction lies a hint of truth. So they're just kind of like generalizing their knowledge. However, a few months into living here, and they found themselves under attack once again. This time, Magcrow could sense it coming. Ken stood on a rooftop of the tallest apartment complex early in the morning. Here, he could always get an amazing view of the sunrise and hope to get another good look before trouble would arrive. In the twilight of a new day, the roof access door rattled open behind them, and their stalker made himself known. Known. A 17-year-old boy named Daniel approached them from behind with a confident glare and his fists at the ready. Of course, Ken tried to talk him out of it, explaining they had no desire to fight and would prefer to enjoy the sunrise in peace. As expected, Daniel declined such an offer and instead rebuttal with a heated transformation. His tuffle, Raw, took hold of the body and wasted no time. By this point in their time together, it had become quite apparent that the duo had no specific trigger to transform. Existing in such shared tranquility, the act of body lending was more intuitive than emotionally driven. Rage and sorrow weren't needed to change, but saved for when Macro's energy needed the extra juice. Calmly, he transformed, and the fight began. Ra was overconfident and opened a barrage of swift attacks, uncoordinated and operating solely based on constant aggro. Ra left himself wide open on many occasions, but still managed to land a fair number of stunning blows in retaliation. The combatants were nearly equal in terms of raw power, but Magro had the advantage in patience and strategy. Manipulating Ra near the edge of the tall building, he was able to force the teen into a strictly defensive position. In the background of their duel, the sun started to rise, saturating the decrepit buildings with a fiery ocean. Their long shadows stretched across the rooftop and beautifully washed the details of this kid's face. Ken, inside, felt pity to fight this misguided soul. As such, Ken's voice broke through Magcrow's lips, a plea for the fighting to stop. The peaceful offer was disregarded. Instead, Ra attacked with all his might. Macro snapped back into control and used his stored demonic energy to send a shockwave of blazing power in a dome around them. This defensive move sent Ra backward, launching him off the side of the building and tumbling down 4 stories to the pavement. A spattering of blood splashed out on each side of the tuffle as he lay twitching. Magro glanced down at him and mantled over the lip of the building, facing the brick and sliding his feet down the 90-degree wall, using each level's outer windowsill to slow his descent until he reached the parking lot. At the bottom, Magro stuffed his hands in his back pockets and stood above his fallen brother. A blood-stained grin was all Ra offered before reverting back to Daniel. As he did, the boy's eyes rolled into the back of his head and his body went limp. A sorrowful exhale and saddened eyes, he glanced over to the sun as it started to peer out from over the distant trees and buildings. The animal was then claimed and his power increased significantly. With this scaling, a large part of Ken's soul had been stripped away. Magro reverted back, and almost instantly Ken doubled over, feeling the effects of this victory restrict his veins. It was abundantly clear right then and there that if they were to continue their pursuit of knowledge over power, no space, then they must forgo any killing, even in self-defense, if Ken is to survive. Before departing back to whichever rundown shack they chose, Ken removed Danielle's solid black track jacket and slipped it on, a memento of the day and something to keep him warm in these pressing times. Which, yeah, so this whole fight sequence is basically canon, not with every word and every single thing, but yeah, he does fight the Tuffle on the rooftop as his first kill in the actual fight, and then he does take the track jacket off of the Tuffle, and that becomes his like signature piece of clothing. They were off, spiritually fueled but mentally conflicted. Even with the pressure they found themselves under, going against the grain and lacking any stable environment, their bond only grew stronger with every passing day. Feeding off of each other's virtues and compassion, a rare trait in Tuffle, as Macro has stated many times. A few months after the death of Raw, the boys had established a less temporary home. Utilizing a small air vent, Ken snuck into the town's library and got comfortable in the attic. A massive stone building with hundreds of rows of books and a small staff to oversee the collection. It was the perfect place for him to reside, sneaking to the ground floor late at night when all were absent and leaving during the day to scavenge for food, clothes, or anything useful. He had everything he needed to keep himself occupied for quite some time. That is, until late one lonely night, Ken was awoken from a terrible nightmare. Sleeping on cardboard and a few discarded bath towels, he was stricken awake by visions of his terrible past. The mangled faces and bodies of those he slaughtered as a teen broke through the mental barriers he set in place. Horribly disfigured, their limbs replaced and molded roots and bone. Uh, they reached out from the darkest corners of his mind, blaming him for all their suffering. This dream was unlike others he has had. This felt real. A fight for his life, sprinting through those familiar halls, dodging the hands as they sprout from the narrow walls, accompanied by a terrible shriek. At the end of the hall was Magcrow, salvation. Dark tendrils nipping at his heels, and the woeful screams showing his, muscles. I don't know. He nearly faltered, but took hold, I guess grabbing at his muscles, I don't know, and took hold of his partner's hand. The shadows fell, snuffed, but when he looked to his friend, he was met by the sight of Adriana, smiling, bleeding. Her skin caught fire and started to melt away, blinding him. With the crackle of her flesh and silence of her corpse. Oh, I like that. With the crackle of her flesh and the silence of her corpse. I like that line. That's cool. He backed away but could not break the line of sight. Under her skin was another layer, gray. In mere seconds that it took to completely eradicate his mother, a new girl took her place, and with it an oppressive wind. He awoke from the terror, forcefully sitting up with a glint of sweat and a tight fist. Magcrow too resurfaced from the depths to comfort Ken, but the two were quickly interrupted by that same presence he felt. Standing just a few feet away near the vent he used as an exit was that very girl. She was short, had gray skin with one side seemingly charred, pastel cyan hair, and a single eye gazing into the very depths of his tattered soul. An introduction. So, stop right real quick. Yeah, so him staying in the library and stuff, in my head, this is not canon. He doesn't stay in the library. He does spend a lot of time going in and out of libraries and all that stuff, yes, but he doesn't take up residence in one. He does mostly stay out in the woods, away from the town on the outskirts, so if he does get attacked by anything, he doesn't involve any innocent bystanders, and he does not meet Chrism this way. He meets Chrism when she tests him by attacking him at his campfire. Fearful at first, the two reacted as she would come to expect under her new affiliation with death. However, the girl's sin used as a monstrous killing machine had since been resurrected. The legends passed around, known even to those outcasts, spoke of the demigod Chrism, a ruthless killer of Tuffle who sought the strongest for her own power gain. Inversely, it was well known that she was the seeker of the defective, and so they prepared themselves for their fate. However, her suspenseful calm reduced their own anxieties, simmering the static between them to a low whir. Instead of dealing out threats or directly attacking them, she greeted with a gentle hello. Stunned, Ken stared ahead with tears in his eyes and a yawn stuck on the back of his tongue. Now again, remember, none of this is canon. Hello, he questioned. Hello? He questioned. Yes, she confirmed in a flat voice. In the darkness of their dusty residence, Ken never let his eyes off of her, and Magcrow recommended the same. I know who you are, he declared, shaking. Do you know why I'm here? He shook his head no. Kill us, probably. A tilt of her head. Why do you say that? With shortness of breath, Ken slammed his eyes shut and allowed Magcrow to take over. The heat rising around them, he switched bodies. Now the Tuffle stood before Chrism, trying to keep confidence in himself. He spoke with a rigid tongue, because we're not killing, because I'm different than my brothers and sisters. It's true, you are different, and that is why I'm here, but I'm not going to kill you. Skeptical, Magcrow readied himself for the fight of his life, taking a stance and starting to pick at the scabs that Ken had left in the dark. Bullshit. Tell me, when you killed your brother, did you feel remorse? She asked, remaining still by the exit. He scoffed, but surprisingly let his guard down a little. Yeah, I did. She nodded. That is why I am here. She took an advancing step, but Magro didn't budge. She closed in on him, stopping within 5 feet. The burns of her flesh and the dull shine of her brown iris were explicitly detailed. She continued, I am here to recruit you. Her words rang through him like a pebble hitting a thin sheet of metal. All his muscles disengaged and he straightened his back. What did you say? Somehow, even though her eye remained wide open, it conveyed a deep well of sadness in her stare. Lifting one hand up and curling the fingertips in just a little, she struggled with her response. For you, okay, for the last 20 years, which is not 20 years, it's like, I think it's 17. For the last 20 years, I've murdered indescribable amounts of innocent people. I was asleep, tangled in a web of every horror I had ever known. This is also well before I had Chrism's actual past fully dictated, and the things that she had done while like that. Yeah, so Chrism is still mostly just an idea for me. She is still a mystery. Strange sympathy swirled in his belly alongside uncertainty that fed a desire to flee. Her voice was so soft. Not long ago, I was forced to murder countless beings and innocent humans. The last one reawakened me. Now that I can see again, I strive to tear down what he is trying to establish, but I need help. Magro, oh, that shouldn't be quotationed. I can't edit it. Magro smirked in disbelief. Chrism, the boogeyman of all Tuffle, wants to kill our father, a god. Sin can be killed. His secrets, weaknesses. He has secrets, weaknesses, but I cannot defeat him on my own. The desperation in her monotone voice was distinctly noticeable. Her explanation was so unexpected, so opposite to everything he was ingrained with as a Tuffle, that he couldn't help but start to laugh. Placing his hand over his chest, his eyes shut tight and a muffled boaster slipped out. Speaking through the hiccup laughter, Macro tried to get himself under control. You want my help. Mine, he emphasized. Hate to break it to you, but I'm not interested in fighting. Not any human, not a Tuffle, not you, and certainly not Sin. His lungs started to recover. You're laughing, she stated. Wiping a tear away, he looked at her, panting with a fading smile. Which is significant because Tuffle don't laugh with glee. They laugh sinisterly. They don't have the capacity to have a joyous laughter, and Ken is laughing in a human way. So she's like, okay, good, this is good. The only two Tuffle who have ever actually laughed like that are, I don't think, actually, has Alice laughed like that? I don't think so. I think Alice has always laughed with like a cynical bite to her, but Magcrow's the only one that's ever laughed positively like that. I'm sure Alice has had a moment where she was genuinely laughing. I just can't think of it right now. So then you won't fight? Not even to stop his reign? He cleared his throat. No. We will defend ourselves if needed, but we refuse to kill again. He knows his fate, and I can't risk Kenneth going to the ditch. Her chin rose slightly. What if I were to tell you that he could forgo that destination? How? If we kill Sin? Forget it, there's no way. If you won't fight, then perhaps you can help me in another way, she pondered. Suddenly, Macro's body jerked forward, followed by a raspy exhale. Bracing himself against the closest wall, his skin faded back to normal and the demonic features washed away. A rapid transformation took place, and Ken pushed off the wall, staring at Chrism with confidence. Another way? His dry words pushed through the thick air. Chrism stepped closer to the boy, instilling fear but exerting no hostility. Mere inches apart, she placed her cragged hand on his right shoulder and looked into his eyes. She spoke in her constantly flat tone. I have been watching you two for some time now. This decision to approach was not on a whim. You each cherished the strength in your minds over your bodies, a desire for knowledge and curiosity for the hidden world that writhes as unadulterated souls persist in ignorance. I have such knowledge to share and further to lend in exchange for your assistance and loyalty. Her offer spiked interest in both their hearts. Biding time and deeply considering, Ken and Macro shared concerns and hopes with such an offer, suspect of motives and outcome. What exactly are you offering? I don't know who asked that. Oh wait, Ken did, because he's up front. Her cold hand fell to the side. My experience and Sin's personal archive. His heart nearly stopped. Lips spreading slowly, doubtful of the truth, he leaned away from her just a little. You're serious, and you trust a human and defective Tuffle with such an abundance of lore. What if I use it against you? The information you indulge is not to be provided at once. Getting certain books, tomes, and scrolls to you without Sin's awareness will not be easy. As such, the data received is not without restrictions. I should not need to inform what will happen if your loyalty wavers. Running his fingers through the shaggy hair, he chuckled. I can imagine. A powerful stillness resided between them, silent contemplation between Toffel and host while Chrism waited patiently, mentally floating in the dark fog of the musky attic. Ken ran in circles around his head. Chrism extended her right hand, limp and rigid. All light mannerisms and skeptical prowling were reduced to a pinprick with her gesture. A brief pause where he considered many things, even feeling the tug on his legs to retreat. But this resonance within, he didn't need any further clarification from his partner. Simpatico, he blinked. She spoke, Are you with me? A snippet of a breath, and he took her hand in his. A single bob of their wrists, and he smiled. His life up until this point has meant nothing, come from nothing, and no one. Now, though he is still learning, a chance like this doesn't happen but once in a lifetime. Perhaps he can truly make a difference. So that is the half true, half non-canon story of Ken and Magcrow. I hope you guys enjoyed. That was a lot. That was an hour. I am at an hour and 35 minutes, an hour and 35 seconds of recording. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe for more. Check out vengeancebooks.com, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.